Welcome back. Look, if you're ready to look past the daily headlines and really understand the invisible scaffolding of the news, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today's explainer is diving into a concept called framing the nation, accountability, and the battle for reality. We're going to unpack the powerful ways in which media doesn't just show us the world. It actually structurally builds the reality we experience every single day.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit the power of media framing, decode the protest paradigm, look at the concept of worthy versus unworthy victims, and finally explore the fact-checking solution.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the power of media framing, and why it goes way beyond just agenda setting.
There's a crucial aha moment for anyone trying to decode the news. We talk a lot about mass media's ability to set the agenda, right? Meaning they tell the public what to think about just by choosing which stories get airtime. But framing is entirely different, and honestly, it's way more powerful. Framing tells the public how to think about those specific issues. It's literally the difference between the media simply pointing a camera at an event and the media dictating the lighting, the angle, and the filter you are forced to view it through.
So, how exactly does this work on a practical level? Well, our source outlines 3 specific powers of framing. When the media constructs a public controversy, say covering anything from a local service delivery protest to a massive national election in South Africa, they use framing to push a very specific interpretation. First, they define what the problem actually is. Second, they provide a moral evaluation of the actors involved, like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And third, they push a treatment recommendation. They subtly suggest what the solution ought to be. It directly influences how citizens interpret reality itself.
And what's really interesting here is how these core concepts are derived directly from our source material on media accountability. The way a public controversy is defined and constructed by these outlets, it is not an accident. It's a highly structured narrative designed to promote those exact problem definitions and moral evaluations we just talked about.
Moving on to Section 2. Let's decode the protest paradigm through the lens of social movements.
The source identifies something called the protest paradigm as a really critical structural dynamic in South African media. Basically, this paradigm kicks in when mainstream media outlets systematically distort or stigmatize the viewpoints of social movements. By applying this specific frame, the media can, whether inadvertently or completely purposefully, act as a support structure for the status quo rather than an objective observer.
You see, mainstream outlets often lean heavily on what's called episodic framing. This means protests are depicted merely as isolated, chaotic, violent incidents, just flashes of anger. But what is missing there? The thematic context. Thematic framing would take those exact same protests and place them within the broader, ongoing context of systemic poverty or inequality. It's like episodic framing shrinks the viewer's world, but thematic framing expands it so you can see the whole picture.
Consider this really striking insight from the source. The media often ends up, quote, focusing on the brutality of protesters while ignoring the brutality of state neglect, unquote. That perfectly illustrates the danger of a narrow frame. By zooming in incredibly tight on a burning tire or a clash in the street, the camera completely crops out the years of institutional failure, the empty promises, and the neglect that literally built the road the tire is burning on. But hey, framing is not just a weapon used against citizens. It's actually a tool that can be wielded by them too. Social movements can absolutely use framing to their own advantage. When marginalized voices construct their own clear, resonant frames, they can pry open brand new political opportunities and really strengthen their collective identity. It's a two-way street. It's this constant battle for the prevailing narrative.
Let's transition to Section 3, worthy versus unworthy victims and structural media bias.
The structural bias of media systems becomes glaringly obvious when we look at how victims are divided up. A propaganda-driven media system basically creates 2 distinct categories. On one side, you have worthy victims. These are the victims whose suffering happens to serve elite political interests. So they get intense focus, endless sympathy, front-page coverage. But on the flip side, you have unworthy victims. These are the folks victimized by the state or its allies. Their suffering is historically ignored or minimized, just because it lacks political utility for the powers that be.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. If the media is ever going to act as a true pillar of accountability, it has to radically shift its approach. It has to move beyond these biased equivalence frames that just prioritize elite utility. True accountability means completely dismantling this worthy versus unworthy dichotomy, so we can provide a genuine platform for marginalized voices, especially those from deeply disenfranchised communities.
But you might be wondering, how do we actually do that today? We are living in an era
defined by what the source calls information disorder, and it's fully supercharged by AI-powered disinformation. When frames are being manipulated faster than humanly possible, how do we actually anchor ourselves to the truth?
Which brings us to our final section. Section 4, the fact-checking solution and tools for transparency.
To combat this overwhelming manipulation of reality, new mechanisms for accountability have had to emerge, and organizations like Africa Check serve as a really vital modern innovation here. They step in to authenticate information, peel back those deceptive frames, and actively combat the rapid spread of false claims. They basically act as the necessary friction against the smooth, fast-moving machinery of disinformation.
Ultimately, a vibrant democracy requires a media ecosystem that doesn't just mechanically report the news. It has to contextualize facts accurately, completely rejecting that narrow episodic framing we discussed earlier. By doing this, they provide the solid factual foundation that is necessary for informed civic participation. And crucially, it actively prevents the historical amnesia that allows past systemic failures to just keep repeating themselves.
We've seen how reality is constructed, how protests are stigmatized, and how victims are categorized by whoever is holding the lens. So, what does this all mean for us? I'll leave you with this thought. Tomorrow morning, when you open a news app or read a headline, will you just accept what they're telling you to think about? Or will you pause, look at the edges of the picture, and question exactly how they're trying to make you think about it? Keep questioning the frame. Catch you next time.